Hey, what's up guys? Paul from Paul's Karts. What I want to talk about is carburetor tuning, and especially in this video this is going to be dealing with MIKUNI Super BN carburetor, and how to tune it for a big block, probably anything over a GX390, and for alcohol. Now a lot of this will still kind of go over to gas, but with alcohol you get a fuel starvation problem on the top end of a big block. So that's what I'm going to talk about, but I'll go through this video on how to tune these carburetors from the ground up, and that tuning process will be the same for gas or methanol. This process will also be pretty similar to a TILLOTSON carburetor, but it will be different than a slide or a flat slide, round slide, or any type of carburetor like that. What I'm talking about is carbs basically with fuel pumps built into them. So on the MIKUNI Super BN, the carburetor has a pump built in on top. Now this is the fuel pump, so on this carburetor, the way you would tune a Super BN is the same as you would tune any carburetor. Now this is the same for gas or alcohol. You want to start from the bottom and work your way to the top. So on a MIKUNI Super BN carburetor, the first circuit you want to tune is basically, and you want to tune it by throttle position. You don't want to tune it by RPM or anything like that, or speed. You want to tune this by throttle position. And a great way of doing it is on your throttle. I marked a constant on the other position, and then I marked, this is quarter throttle, half throttle, 3/4, and full throttle. So as I'm riding it, I can visualize and see exactly what throttle position I'm at and where I'm having any type of tuning issue. So after you mark your throttle and you can have a exact idea of what throttle position you're trying to tune, you could start your tuning process. So the first thing you'd want to do is fire up your bike or your go-kart or your vehicle, and you would want to try to take it for a ride, or just to see if it idles first of all. And so let's start at idle, makes more sense. So you would start your engine and you would try to get an idle. Now, what's controlling fuel through a MIKUNI Super BN on idle is your pop-off. Now, what the pop-off is, when you hear about these things called pop-off, what pop-off is in these type of carburetors that have a fuel pump, they don't deal with atmospheric pressure. In a type of carburetor like a round slide or any type of slide carburetors that don't have a fuel pump built into the carburetor, they deal with atmospheric pressure, which they have vents to the atmosphere. Like this isn't a vent to the atmosphere. This is to prime it. There is no vents to an atmosphere on this carburetor, so there isn't a float. So the pop-off is what they're talking about, is the needle on the seat of the carburetor, basically like what the float would control, and it's controlling basically a little rubber tipped needle that's closing where the fuel's coming through a tube, and the pop-off is the float needle closing and opening on the seat. So the pop-off pressure is how much pressure is being held against that spring and seat. So the pop-off is the first thing you would set in one of these carburetors, and they have pop-off testers where you can check to see what your carburetor is popping off at. You don't really need one of those. Basically, you can just figure out if you're lean or rich by a simple, first of all, if it's idling, you're, that's you got that down, you're idling. But the pop-off regulates the amount of fuel that the entire carburetor sees, and whenever So the pop-off's controlled by a spring. There's different weight springs. So the heavier the spring, the more the less fuel is going to come through your carburetor. The weaker the spring, the easier it is for that the pressure from the pump to pop off the needle off the seat. So you can get different size needle and seats for these, starting at 1.5, 2.0, 2.3, and 2.5. As the number goes up, the hole in the seat's getting bigger. As the hole gets bigger, it allows more fuel through. So the needle in the seat controls and regulates the amount of fuel that can come from the fuel pump into the carburetor. What's keeping that regulated is a spring, basically on a seesaw. So that spring, the amount of tension on that spring is holding that seat. So if you've ever had a round slide or a flat side carburetor and you've put a fuel pump to them, and everyone, you know, that's done that's probably noticed that it starts to overflow. That's because that's a typical float system. And when the float, you know, comes up and the float bowl gets full and it, you know, it's supposed to push the needle against the seat. Well, it's not really doing it that hard. So the fuel keeps coming in and it overflows out of the carburetor. Well, this style carburetor, the MIKUNI Super BN and TILLOTSONs and stuff like that, have a built-in fuel pump. So they don't have a float. They're regulated through a spring and a pop-off. So the spring is keeping more pressure on the needle and seat to allow it to regulate fuel pressure from the fuel pump. Now, when you get your needle and seat figured out with the correct size, so the lighter the spring, the bigger the seat you put in, you know, you're going to get more fuel. You need less fuel, you could put a heavier spring. You keep putting in heavier springs. So you want to find the right combination between spring and seats, needle and seat size to regulate your fuel. A lot of companies say around 21 pounds is great. On a big block, 460, you're going to want, or anything over a 390, you're going to want the biggest needle and seat, and you're going to want the lightest spring for pop-off. Because you want, especially if you're tuning for alcohol. If you're tuning for gas, you're going to have to figure that out. But if you're tuning for alcohol, you don't want any restrictions in this system. So, you know, you want to figure out your pop-off first. And, you know, quick way of figuring out your pop-off is taking the bike for a ride. Now, when you have the throttle marked off, the pop-off only controls the fuel flow, or the only thing it'll tune with is up to 1/4 throttle. After 1/4 throttle, you're going to be on your pilot jet. So the pop-off controls your idle to 1/4 throttle. It continues to control the fuel flow for the rest of all the way to wide open throttle, but it only has a tuning effect between 0 and 1/4 throttle. And like I said, if you're on alcohol, you want the lightest spring with the biggest needle and seat hole. You want to be able to open that system up as much as possible. Now, from 1/4 throttle to 1/2 throttle, what it is your pilot jet. So you want to be able to come from idle to 1/4 throttle without any hesitation. If you have any hesitation, you're lean. If it bogs, now there's two types of bogs, a lean bog and a rich bog. A lean bog just falls on its face and it won't recover. It's just whoop, it just totally goes flat. A rich bog will bog like, and it'll try to fight through it. And if you kind of like pump the gas, it'll just pull through. That's a rich bog. What they also refer to as loaded up. If you hear someone says the carburetor's loaded up, what they're talking about is it being rich. So, and that'll come from your pop-off. So from you know, 0 to 1/4 throttle, if you have any leanness in there, you need to go bigger seat, lighter spring, or a combination of the two. If there's a richness, you need to go smaller. So after 1/4 throttle, so from 1/4 throttle to 1/2 throttle, now you're on your pilot jet. Now your pilot jet, you know, that's just simple. You know, if you have a lean hesitation, where it feels like it's falling on its face, what you want to do is put a bigger pilot jet. If it feels rich, put a smaller pilot jet. And it's the same thing, you know. And you always want to start rich. When in doubt, fatten her out. You know, if you don't know if it's rich or lean, just go way rich and see if it makes it any better. You know, you never want to say, oh, I don't know if it's rich or lean, and try leaner. Never just try leaner. If you're in doubt, always fatten it out first. You know, just try pulling the jet completely. If you're on alcohol and you don't know if you're rich or lean, just pull the entire jet from the circuit and just see if that makes a difference. When you're on methanol or alcohol, you're going to need to really fatten up these jets. I'm talking about, you know, pull them out. Right now in this carburetor, I have 0 jets. I know that sounds crazy, but this is a seriously big block. And this Super BN has no jets. Another thing is, so you get to half throttle, and then from half throttle to 3/4 throttle, you're on your main jet. And then from 3/4 throttle to wide open throttle, you're on your adjustment screw. Oh, and you also have a low speed adjustment screw too. So now let me talk about the adjustment screws. So those are the throttle positions from, you know, from idle to quarter throttle, that's your Popoff. From quarter throttle to half throttle, that's your pilot jet. Half throttle, 3/4 throttle to wide open throttle is all main jet, and 3/4 throttle to wide open throttle is your main adjustment, and to adjust for a good idle is your low speed adjustment. You have a low speed adjustment needle and a high speed adjustment needle, so those adjust the mixtures. On methanol, right now the way I have this set up, no jets in it. Wide open throttle is turned 3 turns out, which means there's no further adjustment, and I have the low speed adjuster turned half a turn out. So that's the way I have this set up. This is a 460 big block running on methanol, high compression engine. No jets, half turn out on the low side, 3 turns out on the high side. Now, another problem you might run into with these type of carburetors is pulse issues. Now, these type of carburetors are powered by a pulse. The pulse line can be picked up from a block, valve cover, or intake. Now, where you pick up the pulse from could do different things. Now, you need a strong pulse to run these carburetors. If there's a weak pulse, you're not going to pump enough fuel, especially if you're on alcohol. Now, if you're trying to pump methanol, alcohol through a carburetor, you are really going to need a good, strong pump, and you're going to need, you know, big jets, if any jets. I will say that a Super BN carburetor, or any type of pumper carburetor, I know for these carburetors, this pump is the regulator. So I talked to somebody last night about carburetors, and they said, oh, I'm running a secondary pump. Well, I think they have 3 fuel pumps. They had a pump here, pump down the side, they have another pump on their Tillotson, and you know, they were running these pumps in line to this pump. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, there's no way that makes any sense, because, you know, say if this wasn't a pumper carburetor, if I had 2 fuel pumps and sandwiched them back to back and took the 2 outlet lines and ran them into a Y and then ran those into a non-pumper carburetor, yes, both of those fuel pumps would be multiplying fuel pressure. But when you take 2 fuel pumps and run them into this pump or any type of pump on a Tillotson, this pump now stops the fuel flow coming in. Any type of fuel flow, it does, see, like in this situation, it's gravity fed, so gravity feeds the fuel down to the fuel pump. If you try putting a secondary pump on this, what it's going to do is just, even though it's gravity fed, is it's going to draw the fuel into a fuel pump. Then it's going to pressurize it slightly, 2 to 4 psi, and it's going to pump it out, and then it's going to come to this pump. The only time that will help is if there's a fuel starvation coming up to the pump. Now, 90% of the time there's not. This pump can get fuel up to it and pump it out at as fast a rate, as the fastest rate as it can pump. Once you get to the maximum capabilities of your fuel pump in your carburetor, what you have to do in a MIKUNI Super BN carburetor, What I just ordered is a block off plate. So you could take the top of this carburetor off, which is the fuel pump. You could take this off, and Hot Product sells a plate that you bolt on, and it bypasses the fuel pump. Then you can get a separate fuel pump that pumps like, 30 gallons an hour, like a big MIKUNI fuel pump, like a 702, and mount it. And that's made for like a big 1200 board out to like a 1600 jet ski, which is like a 2-stroke 1600 cc jet ski. And those things have two 50mm carburetors on them. So if you're having any fuel type of delivery issues, that big 702 MIKUNI fuel pump is what you need. So what you would do is you would block off this fuel pump, and you would take that big fuel pump, because if you don't block off this fuel pump, doesn't matter what you put for a pump before this, that pump is just going to be pumping up stuff, and then once it hits this pump, it has to come in, stop. This thing has to pulse. It squeezes it. This thing is pulsing. So it's pumping, letting fuel in, letting fuel out, letting fuel in, letting fuel out. It doesn't matter how much pressure is coming in, it's still going to stop it, pump it in, pump it out. It's going to regulate it. So you can have 10 fuel pumps before this, and this fuel pump is going to just stop that pressure, cold in its tracks, pump it to its own pressure, and regulate it. So putting any additional fuel pumps before this is not going to help. If you need more fuel pressure than this can supply, like I already need, I still, even on with no jets in this carburetor running methanol, because I'm trying to go to nitromethane. So I need to be able to dial in methanol first, rich, so I could start going 5%, 10%, 20% nitromethane up to 50%. Now, if you can't get methanol even correct, don't even try nitromethane. But these carburetors would be great for gas. I mean, once you get to methanol, they start getting pushed beyond their means. But I think, this is like almost a 500cc engine. I think if you were at a 390, you could probably get it done. Just no jets. And like I told you how to set it up. Now, if you need to get, say, bigger than this engine, say if you have a bored out, big piston, 550cc 4-stroke or something, or you have it on an even bigger engine than this and you need to get more fuel through it, block off the fuel pump and then get a bigger external fuel pump, and just the pop-off will still regulate it. So, I mean, you could go from having no jets in with this fuel pump and then get a bigger fuel pump, block this one off, bypass this completely, and then you might even have to go and put some jets back in it because you'll have so much fuel pressure. But I just wanted to make this video on tuning the MIKUNI Super BN carburetors. Again, this is Paul from Paul's Karts. I hope this helped. If you have any information on tuning these carburetors for alcohol, please comment, subscribe. I myself am looking for information, so if you have any, put it below. Leave some for others. This is a lot of people are talking about fuel pumps on big blocks and fuel starvation on the top end and stuff like that. So if you have any questions, concerns, problems, fixes, or knowledge, please post that below, and let's get something going here, because there is definitely a lack of knowledge on this. I mean, I went through Bob's Karting forum. I've spoken to a lot of people. It seems like there's a lot of confusion. I seem like I got it figured out, but this is really only for the Super BN. So if you guys are running Tillotssons and you have some type of fixes for problems, like the guy I talked to last night, he's got a 440 big block stroker. He's having fuel starvation problem. He's sending his carburetor back today to where he got it from, competition carburetors. And so, I mean, if you guys have any fixes for these things, as far as I know, for the 38 Super BN, if you are having fuel starvation problems, Hot Product sells a block off plate, and there's a MIKUNI dual carburetor fuel pump. That's a 702 series. And that's supposed to be the fix for all your fuel problems. So this is Paul from Paul's Karts, and until next time, you guys have a great day. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.